So I got a question from a viewer about using intermittent fasting when dealing with SIBO. So in this video, I kind of want to talk about some of the benefits that can come from intermittent fasting when you're trying to improve a SIBO situation. But I also want to talk about some scenarios where using fasting can really magnify the problems for a person, and they might want to fix some issues before they start to implement any type of fasting situation. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So it was over on our video for 5 types of people who should not use intermittent fasting, where King 66 something or other user asked, why should someone not fast with digestive symptoms? Like, does it not make sense when someone has SIBO that they would want to support the MMC function to keep the small bowel clean so they can absorb nutrients from the food? Can you make this point clear? So before we jump into this, just for the benefit of those who are die-hard fasters and become violently defensive anytime someone talks poorly about their precious intermittent fasting, I'm a fan of intermittent fasting. I use intermittent fasting sometimes. I use it with some of my clients. I understand the benefits. I even teach courses on how to benefit from intermittent fasting. So I'm a fan. Don't view it as I'm one of these people who think, oh, you can't fast, you're going to die by Thursday. That's not the situation. But as much as I understand the benefits, just like any supplement or any diet or pretty much any lifestyle choice, the way that it can benefit some people, it can also cause problems for others. We all have different bio-individuality and we all process foods differently, and everything is not going to have the same reaction for every person. That's just how humans work. So just try not to view something like, oh, it really showed benefits for this person, so it's going to be good for everybody. That's really not how it works. There are scenarios where jumping from a crashing plane is very beneficial. You have a parachute on, you jump from the plane that's crashing, that was a good idea. That doesn't mean that always jumping from a plane is a great idea. If you don't have a parachute, I'm going to let you know, probably not a great idea. So just because a scenario is great for one person doesn't mean it's going to be great for everybody in all scenarios. So when we're looking at the benefits from fasting while you're trying to improve a SIBO situation, one thing that can really be beneficial is the increased autophagy, that breakdown of all these old tissues so that they can be rebuilt and renewed. That's very beneficial for any tissues in the intestinal tract that may have been damaged during this SIBO situation. So that's really great news for somebody who might have some problems going on. That's a benefit that can come. And when you look at the studies that look at fasting with SIBO and improving SIBO, they're kind of viewing it like, well, it can positively impact the diversity and abundance of the microbiota. So that must be good for SIBO. So we got to do this just to fix SIBO. We might as well throw fasting in there. But most of the studies that you look at were on mice. It's very limited studies when you're looking at actual humans. And one thing that we want to think about when we're looking at what King 66 or whatever was asking, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact username. I don't think that's offensive to you, is it, right? I know it's King something. But when we're talking about this migrating motor complex, this MMC, and basically this kind of happens in between meals, and it's kind of this peristalsis action that moves things through the intestinal tract. It kind of helps clean up old food matter and even bacteria in that small intestinal tract to kind of clear things through and keep things moving. And yes, you want that to be clear and clean so that you have a better ability to absorb all the nutrients in your food. All of that is beneficial. But when you look at that MMC situation, it's really, you just need like 10 to 12 hours in between a meal to really get the benefits from that action. So if somebody's eating their dinner, at like 7 or some type of reasonable time like that, and then they wake up and they're eating again, at 6 or 7, that's going to be 10 to 12 hours. So you're not really doing aggressive intermittent fasting like most people are doing, where they're skipping breakfast and maybe even skipping lunch as well. So again, extending this period a little bit, maximizing that MMC function, there's nothing wrong with that. That truly can be beneficial. But that doesn't mean that a person has to do that to fix their SIBO situation or maximize improving the situation. Because when you're looking at this function, the studies that you read, they show a slow in this function is seen in conjunction with SIBO. But the way that you read the studies, it kind of makes it sound like, well, since it's seen with SIBO, we kind of view it like not having this working correctly causes SIBO. And that's not really what's going on. We need to understand that things move through that intestinal tract at a pace according to its acidity level. So when things are way too acidic, then they'll move through very quickly, because otherwise that acidity can digest the intestinal tract and damage it and create all this inflammation. So the body brings all the water it can to the intestinal tract to cool off those acids and then rushes it out the back door, and we have crazy diarrhea. So this is a scenario that's very common if someone's making enough stomach acid and acidifying their food correctly, but they don't have enough bile and other systems to neutralize those acids and then slow them down. Now, if somebody doesn't make enough stomach acid, now that stool is leaning too far on the alkaline side, and it will really move through at a slower pace, and a slow enough pace that that stool can really get hard and dry and create some chronic constipation issues. So this is just one possible cause of constipation. It's not the only one, but we need to understand that the movement through that system is usually going to go according to the pH of that stool and according of that bolus of what you ate and is now being digested. The acidity of that bolus dictates its speed. So when we're looking at a person has SIBO and this function is not working well enough, well, we need to understand the fact that it's going to move slower when that is leaning more on the alkaline side. And when someone has SIBO, for a lot of these bacteria and other varmints that come in there, the waste that they put off is alkaline. So they're kind of alkalizing this environment even more and kind of alkalizing the stool and making it move slower. And another thing we need to understand is that the stomach acid is not just there to help us digest that food. It's like the barrier to the whole intestinal tract. So when someone is not making enough stomach acid, that's how these varmints come in. They should be frying in an acid bath when they come in on the food that we eat. They should die in that stomach acid. But if someone's not making enough stomach acid, then they come in and they set up camp and they're like, this is a nice place. We should vacation here year round. So they thrive and they multiply, and then we get this crazy overgrowth scenario, and they move down to the small intestine, and now we have the SIBO. So in most cases, that SIBO is there because there wasn't enough stomach acid. So that can be a scenario where that stool is going to move slower, the bolus is going to move slower because it's more alkaline, and then all of a sudden this MMC function is not working as well. Why isn't it working as well? It's because there's SIBO there. Or it's because everything is more alkaline and the SIBO is there because the stomach was more alkaline. We really want to look at how the body functions and think through how these things happen to understand what's really going on. So I'll link some studies below that give us some ideas that you really need both sides of digestion working correctly in order to keep all the bad guys out. You need enough stomach acid there. When you're dealing with a hypochlorhydria issue or a lack of stomach acid, the odds of some type of bacterial overgrowth coming into the stomach or the small intestine go way up. Now, if bile is not flowing correctly, that also shows an increase in the odds of some type of overgrowth coming in. A lot of folks feel like the acidity in the stomach kills a lot of bacteria, and the bacteria that have the ability to get through that acidic environment are going to get fried by the alkaline bile and the alkaline bicarb. So you really want both things working to keep all the bad guys out. So here's what we want to look at, and here's what we want to understand, the things that can go wrong if the wrong person is using fasting. So in order to make that stomach acid, the body needs minerals and resources to be able to create that hydrochloric acid. And it's really common today for someone not to be making enough stomach acid. And then once they're not making it, now you can't acidify that food in a way that you can break the food down and get all the minerals and nutrients out of that food. So now the person doesn't have enough minerals and nutrients to make the hydrochloric acid. So they can get stuck in this broken cycle of no digestion for years or decades. So what happens when a person is not getting enough minerals and resources in there is that also has the ability to stress the body because it doesn't have the resources it needs to function correctly, and it will start raising these stress hormones. So I'll put some links to some studies in the description below this video that help us understand that when some stress hormones like estrogen go too high, it can thicken up that bile so it won't flow correctly. So now what we're doing is we're taking this individual that already doesn't have enough resources to let their body function correctly. And now we're going to say, hey, well, just don't eat. Don't eat at all and bring in no resources. So now the resources are going to go even lower, stressing out the body even more, raising more stress hormones, and thickening up the bile and turning off that digestive process. So when someone has SIBO, it's not that they don't benefit from that fasting. They really could. But a lot of people with SIBO have done enough steps to correct those malfunctions. Or maybe their body does have enough resources. They just happen to be dealing with a SIBO issue. Then when they're fasting, they're going to get more benefits from that. There are aspects of fasting that have the ability to magnify problems with specific scenarios going wrong. So if a person has that scenario going wrong and they're using fasting to get the benefits of that fasting, but they're creating more harm than good, then they're not really benefiting from those benefits. They're only creating more trouble. But if that same person fixed those malfunctions first, all of a sudden they would get all those benefits from the fasting, and then the fasting could be used to accelerate that recovery from the SIBO. And when you read all these studies about the benefits of using fasting with SIBO, you read like, okay, when you're fasting, your body goes into ketosis and all these other benefits can come about. And that's part of the situation. A lot of people are fasting in a way that their body can't go into ketosis. They're eating all these high carb foods, or their body is really set up to be dependent on glucose. So when they go without food, it's just stressing the body. They're not really fat adapted enough to benefit or go into ketosis and get all the benefits from that ketosis and from the fasting. So it's really about making sure the person is set up to succeed on the fasting for them to get the benefits from that fasting. So that means a person wants to make sure they're not eating too many carbs or processed junk when they're going to be fasting the next morning. They want to make sure that mineral levels are not too low, that they're going to stress the body out even more when they go without food. They want to fix any digestive malfunctions. And we say that someone should not use intermittent fasting when they're having digestive symptoms. And yes, SIBO is a digestive symptom. But if a person is taking steps to correct those digestive malfunctions and sort of help them synthetically, maybe they're helping to acidify the stomach even when the body can't make enough stomach acid. Maybe they're taking steps to thin the bile out so that it can flow correctly. Now they're kind of synthesizing this digestive function even when the body's not set up to do it on its own. Now they're making it so they can digest their food and get nutrients out of that food, so fasting is not going to stress them out as much. If a person's body is dependent on glucose, they need to set things up so their body can be more fat adapted, so they can go into a state of ketosis when they're fasting. If a person is dealing with what we call a catabolic imbalance, where the body is basically stuck in the breakdown state all the time, then you really don't want to magnify autophagy. You're not going to get the benefits of autophagy if your body's already breaking down all the time anyway. So all of these problems are important to correct and to be able to understand if they're going wrong to really get those benefits from the intermittent fasting. So if you need to understand if any of those issues are a problem for you that need to be corrected, you can jump over and check out our video on 5 types of people who should not use intermittent fasting. And just keep in mind, if you're having those issues, that doesn't mean you should never fast. It means you want to correct those issues so that you can get the benefit from the intermittent fasting. I can't wait to hear about your results.